Georgia dogs Texas again. They beat the Longhorns 22-19 in the SEC championship in overtime. When Texas went into halftime with the 6-3 lead, I was just telling myself, JT, Georgia's a second half team. They've been in all of these types of games all season long. This is nothing new to them. Then Carson Beck gets injured. And I'm like, okay, let's see what Gunnar Stockton has, because Carson Beck, he didn't really look that good in this game. And when Gunnar Stockton came in, he gave Georgia's offense the spark that they needed, because Texas, think about it, all week long, they were game planning for Carson Beck. And Carson Beck, when he played against Texas the first go around, he threw 3 interceptions, and Georgia still found the way to win in spite of it. And when he came in, not only did he provide this offense a spark, but he also ended up putting them in position to win this game in overtime. Georgia, you can still say that this team doesn't look good enough to win a national championship, but nobody really thought that they were going to beat Texas for a second straight time. Texas on paper looked like the better team than what Georgia did, but there are some things that you just can't use to judge a team, because some things you can't judge a team on paper. When you watch Georgia play all year long, they've been the most battle-tested team in all of college football. They had the most difficult schedule out of anybody. They had to go on the road and play Alabama, on the road to play Texas, had to play Ole Miss and Oxford, had to play Tennessee at home. That's a really tough 4-game stretch, and yet Alabama, despite how difficult their schedule was, they dropped games to teams they had no business losing to. Georgia, yeah, they got into a dogfight with Georgia Tech, but that's just college football, people. The sign that you are a great team is that you just find ways to survive in advance. And this game was no different from the other games that Georgia has won this year. This has been a team that I felt has been the most well-coached out of anybody, because Georgia, with all of the injuries they had at one point, the lack of depth that they have at several positions, they just have found ways to win in spite of it not always being pretty. When I was on the Bleacher Report app, I saw folks saying that this was a boring game. Both of these two teams are overrated. Like, shut the hell up. Not every game needs to be a 45-42 shootout for it to be a great game. This was a great game because you had two very good defensive teams that played their best football on the defensive side of the ball. The difference in this game was that Georgia, when they needed plays the most late down the stretch, they got them. Gunnar Stockton, to me, he outplayed Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers, for as much hype as he had coming out of high school, he's never lived up to it. He was the 5th highest rated quarterback in recruiting history, right behind Vince Young, who was 4th. And yet in the biggest moments in this game, he failed to deliver. He threw 2 interceptions, only 1 touchdown. And when Gunnar Stockton came in, I was saying, maybe Texas should just go ahead and put in Arch Manning. And I'm wondering just how good is Texas going to be in the playoffs. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up being one and done. I don't expect Georgia to be a one and done team. I could see a path where Georgia easily gets back to the Final Four with how great their defense is. Georgia just finds ways to win. Texas has kind of been on fraud watch all year long because their best win is against Texas A&M. That's about it, and A&M isn't even ranked anymore. It seems like Texas has kind of been the team that kind of was getting the benefit of a doubt. I've never seen a game that Texas has played this year that screamed to me they were the second best team in college football. Georgia, for as inconsistent as they have been this year, all they do is win. I don't care about the style points. With how difficult the Bulldog schedule has been this year, they've been tested. Nobody should have ever questioned who was going to be able to win this game, because we've seen countless times Georgia be against the ropes and they still find a way to pull out a W out of their ass. And the final 5 minutes of this game defined Texas season in a nutshell. The play calling out of Steve Sarkisian was absolutely abysmal. Like, what the hell was he calling? And late in the fourth quarter, when he's spamming all of those end zone shots, trying to get the touchdown, in overtime, you go for a double screen pass after you already had given up 6 sacks. That was just absolutely insanity to me. The play calling out of Steve Sarkisian was really questionable. And Quinn Ewers didn't play good neither. So you can't just blame Quinn Ewers for Texas losing this game. You got to give Steve Sarkisian just as much as the blame as you're going to give Quinn, because he wasn't that good. Kirby Smart flat out coached Texas and that whole entire staff the final 5 minutes of this ball game, from the last 2 minutes in the fourth quarter to the overtime period. Georgia was the better, more well-prepared team compared to Texas. I don't really see Texas going that far this year in the postseason. I really believe that them and Penn State have been two of the most overrated teams in the sport this year. And when I did my prediction for this game and I picked Georgia, the pushback was, you really picking Georgia after they barely beat Georgia Tech? And that's the thing that really irritates me about this. You can't judge teams based off a week-to-week basis. You have to judge a team for their overall body of work. And what we've seen Georgia do for the entirety of this season is find ways to win, no matter how ugly it might have been. This is just a great team. They got a true heart of a champion. Meanwhile, for Texas, I mean, they're in dogfights with Arkansas. They were in a dogfight with Vanderbilt. They didn't even play that well against Texas A&M. The defense carried them in that game. So who gives a F if Georgia Tech almost beat Georgia? You feel me? Georgia won the game. They lived to fight another fight. But Texas on the other end, you know, they kind of had this one coming. Their best game of the season was against Michigan on the road, and Michigan isn't that good this year. The best team Texas played this year, they lost to for the second straight time today, which was Georgia. You can say Texas was the better team. They had the better roster. I would agree with you. But when it came to execution in the crucial moments, when Steve Sarkisian needed to cook up a great play call and Quinn Ewers had to execute it to win the game, they were unable to get it done. Shout out to Georgia for once again reclaiming the SEC throne. Going into this season, I picked Alabama to win it. I thought that it was going to be Alabama and Texas squaring off in the SEC title game. But, of course, with Alabama falling to Oklahoma, that just opened up the floodgates for a lot of chaos to happen. Georgia gets in, along with a few other teams getting upset. And what happens when you allow a wounded animal that's in survival mode to get into a position like this is that they find a way to come out on top. You never want to mess with a desperate man, because desperate men do desperate things, and that's the mentality that Georgia has had all season long. They've been desperate. They just have been desperate to find ways to win in advance. Georgia, once again, shows everybody why they are an elite program in this sport, because no matter how down and out they may look, no matter how ugly things may look for them in certain games, all they do is win. This is a program that only has 4 losses in the last, 4 to 5 seasons? A few to Alabama, 1 to Ole Miss this year. Texas got dog-walked again. And I'm not surprised at the outcome. I felt this was going to be a close game. I felt the only way Texas would beat Georgia is if they blew them out. And there was no chance in hell that was going to happen. Georgia has just been so used to playing in these kinds of moments where it's a tight game, the offense hasn't really done nothing, and somehow, some way, they just find a way to win. You know, that's a sign that you have a great team. And I'm still not counting out Georgia's chances of being able to win it all. You know, if the game is close going into the fourth quarter, Georgia has a shot to win it. They just know how to win these kinds of matchups. They know how to win a 10-round fight. They're not worried about losing the first 8 rounds, because the last 2 rounds, they're trying to knock your ass out. Texas doesn't have the ability to do that. We saw the similar situation play out when they lost to Washington in the semifinals of the playoffs last season. You know, for Steve Sarkisian, I just think that this program, as much as they have elevated under him over these last couple of years, he's now kind of hit that wall. And it's going to take a few years for him to finally knock it down. Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs seem to have his number. But Georgia is your 2024 SEC champions. Shout out to the Bulldogs for defying the odds when at one point this year, you even wondered if Georgia was even going to be in the playoffs. There was a point when you thought they were going to be a 3-loss team. And the same discussion we're having about Alabama, I thought we could have been having about Georgia.